When it comes to Trunks and his thing about being fumbling, well, with the right intents, it does have the means to be stopped. Hey folks, MasakoX here. This story has been somewhat of a cathartic experience for me. Back around episode 67 of Dragon Ball Super, that thing that drove me bonkers the most happened, and I still have not gotten over it. And I think you all out there would know what I'm talking about and would be with me on this one. Zeno wiped away completely a big portion of what made Future Trunks originally so compelling and so cool. Just taken away. Everything that he had fought for some very arbitrary reason, without cause, and without any just reason or time to think of anything else. And oh yeah, pawn Future Trunks off somewhere else where they don't belong for good measure. Yeah, well, in this story, we had them instead staying in the past. So at least they could be around people they knew and be their own people, doing their own things. Okay, granted, there are younger versions of them here, but there's plenty of ways to be different to them. In the last part, the Tournament of Power was wrapped up and Future Trunks got to do his bit against the likes of Dispo, with the aid of Gohan from this timeline, somewhat reflecting his past glory days with his teacher from his own timeline. You know, before it was wiped out, the timeline that little blue imp above had purged out of Impulse. Still a bit sore, just like he'd so often done. Trunks did meet his end in the tournament with the likes of Toppo, but at least he gave the Pride Trooper a good battle, a worthy battle. It was at least just enough to not bring about the destroyer mode of that very jovial and bushy battler. What was the tournament result, I hear you ask, if you're new to this? Well, it ended up as a tie, when Jiren and Android 17 were the last ones standing and agreed that the purpose of this battle and this contest was utterly pointless and inane. I brought some of the persona of Jiren from the manga into play here, by the way, since there he is quite a bit more interesting, and he needs a lot more going for him. Frieza was also brought back to life for his part in the team, like in the original, and left his return very much wide open to be exploited. Well, sure enough, guess what happens next, as we wrap up this story of Trunks and Mai joining their friends in the past. The time had come. Future Mai could feel her body urging their little one out into the world. Whis had actually arrived a little late than he had promised, apologising for being inconvenient, and Bulma giving him an earful for not being attentive enough and saying to him that he won't be getting as many sweet treats in return that he'd been promised. Now, he would obviously think that a cosmic being such as Whis wouldn't be bothered by such a statement about candy. Well, he was. He genuinely was upset and apologetic for being late. I'm so sorry to be so late, but Lord Beerus was very insistent that I don't care. Do to Mai what you did to me. Right, Bulma. Mai was very uncomfortable, and Bulma was very glad that she didn't get as big as she was right now. That would have looked very painful if you had to do that naturally, had they not had an angel on call as a midwife. Well, with the flick of his staff, just like with Bulla, Whis delivered the little bundle of joy quite cleanly and effortlessly. Like it was a natural. The shrieks of a newborn were heard amongst the halls of Capsule Corp once more. Trunks had been around the whole time, in fact, but had been told to be quiet by the likes of his past father. Vegeta had been through all of this before, twice in fact, with Trunks and Bulla, and told his son that the best thing to do was to not get in the way. However, now he was here to witness the arrival of his first child, a boy. Now, what do we do with the name? Well, Trunks is Trunks, but what about Mai? What's she got to do with clothing? Well, if you were to translate Mai, one meaning could be using this kanji, which translates roughly to linen robe. Ooh, clothing! It's almost destiny, right, Trunks x Mai? Kitty hams, I know you're going to be happy about that one. So, how about a rejigging of the word, hipari? You know, it's like some sort of sleepwear for the summer period. You know, quite loosely some sort of underwear. So, Pari, I think. So, Hipari Pari. Baby Pari was a very relaxed and calm baby. Once the initial cries of new life had abated, he was a very sleepy soul, and Bulma was very surprised given how much turmoil the pair had been through in the future prior to their settling in the past and all that Goku Black stuff. Trunks and Mai, though, weren't all that surprised. I guess he's acting what we've been longing to act for the longest time, to rest, relax and whatnot, Trunks stated with pride. At last, they had a family, and the pain of Zeno was gone. The future hero had something else on his mind to focus on. Bulma was now in a situation where she had become, sort of, a grandmother. She sought Chi-Chi's counsel with how to deal with the conundrum. She would have asked her own mother for advice, but she didn't seem to be all that fazed at all. And she was going to become a great-grandmother, you know, despite the whole future paradox thing and them not being directly related, but yet also related. But Chi-Chi's advice was to simply go along with it. Quite flexible and easygoing for her, but that was easier said than done. Chi-Chi, my own daughter is like, only 18 months older than my grandson? How weird is that? Well, it wasn't that bizarre to have such a gap between kids as Chi-Chi stated. After all, Goten and Gohan had about 11 years between each other in terms of age, and that didn't bother them at all. In fact, it was absolutely fantastic. Gohan was a brilliant bigger brother. And as the ladies were discussing the intrigue between temporal tops, Vegeta was very pleased to have a grandson, and one that looked more like a Saiyan than his own Trunks. Party had a black fleck of hair, and his face was very like his kind, Saiyans.
Excellent. Even though his name is not like a Saiyan's, at least he looks the part.
Trunks laughed this off though. He knew his father wasn't going to disown his own progeny over the sake of names. So, as long as the prince was happy, that was what counted. However, it wasn't all fun and games. Deep in space, the events of the Broly movie were unfolding, including the discovery of Broly and Paragus on Vampa. Chilai and Lemmo were the ones to find them, like before, since everything up to episode 66 of Super was identical to the original series, so between then, the original situation with the Frieza Force is pretty identical, including the acquisition of personnel. The Dragon Balls of Earth are still the subject of Frieza's attention, and despite the addition of another very strong Super Saiyan into his mind, it was not something that concerned him too much. After all, he now had a strong Saiyan of his own, and even though he didn't seem to have the Super Saiyan power himself yet, he reckoned that with a little bit of training and knocking him around himself, that would bring that out in the fullness of time. And speaking of time, Cronoa had dropped in from time to time and requested Future Trunks' assistance for various missions across time and space, so as to make up for his messing around with time back in the Cell Saga. She'd grown quite close with Trunks actually, as a friend, and relied on him quite regularly for these situations, deeming him a reliable time patroller and somebody she could gel with quite nicely. It was just a shame that he was a mortal being. She would have quite liked to have kept him around for almost eternity, really. Perhaps maybe, if he does really, really well, he and his family could have their lives extended perhaps, but would they want that? Well, anyway, she did have that power she could bestow upon the worthiest of time patrollers, so, it was always up for debate. For now though, she was very happy at the arrival of Party, and despite her knowing his future and what he would do, she had to keep that very much a secret. It almost drove her mad to keep that from Trunks. She wanted to tell him, but she was the supreme Kai of time. There was no reason to tell him about Party's future, and so she had to keep her mouth shut. But, she did allow Trunks to have some time with his boy, and instead, she was able to vent a little about Frieza. She had to get something out. Be careful of that one. He's up to something. Really? Up to what? Said Mai, who had just put Party to bed after a play session with Cronoa. Oh, the usual, the kind of stuff he does. He likes to mess around with the Saiyans. That's all I can say.
Granted Vegeta, who had been sitting in a chair nearby paying half attention. That's not exactly a big reveal. Frieza is always up to something. That's what he lives for. Perhaps enlighten us more helpfully next time. Cronoa grumped.
Well, if you're going to be that crass with me, Prince of all Saiyans, maybe I won't tell you. She got up to leave, but told Trunks to be prepared in case Frieza did rock up. With that in the back of his mind, Trunks did his best to train with his father, who was always happy to prepare for Frieza's meddling if it came around. In that time, Trunks was starting to figure out the knack behind Super Saiyan Blue, having not had the time to do it prior. And who better to help him but the guy who had perfected it and figured a lot of things out about Super Saiyan God all out on his own. Vegeta felt like Trunks should pull his weight around here too, since he was now going to be living in this time permanently, and especially since he had a kid in his timeline, he wasn't really going to be going anywhere now. And besides, Trunks was a very good pupil, and he in turn was a good figure to look up to for the present Trunks. He could take a leaf out of his own future self's book, so a sequel of his own book. But he did his best to follow along with the basic principles of Super Saiyan Blue, despite him not knowing the God Key initial steps. That's present Trunks, by the way.
You will do well to heed these lessons now, so when you're of age, you too will be able to ascend.
Present Trunks was quite bold at this. Well, if my future self can do it, then so can I. Ha! Future Trunks laughed.
You're so like I was when I was your age. Bring me with hope. I'm glad you'll get to stay that way. You'll go far, kid.
This bonding session went very well, right up to the point when Dende had told the group that indeed, Frieza's men were on the planet and they were looking for Dragon Balls. With the gang being mobilized for the event, Frieza wasn't that far behind. Having had the jump on getting the balls much more competently than before in the movie, since present Trunks wasn't around to warn his mother on the telephone like in the movie, this was more of a surprise, but it wouldn't really amount to too much. Frieza was sadly still unable to get his dream of being 5 centimeters taller. However, he was still able to set Broly on the likes of Vegeta, but this time, there was Future Trunks there too, for good measure. Mai, though, had been very concerned that Trunks was getting obsessed with training, getting himself embroiled in something like this, despite vowing to step back and focus on his family, something that he had been actually craving for so long before, is in the future especially, whilst under the boot of Goku Black.
Mai, I can't explain it, but being around Dad awakes the Saiyan in me. It's hard, but I have potential to stop Earth from being destroyed, and since I couldn't save our old home, I can only do my best in protecting this one. And this time, I've got help.
I hope you're right, tapered off Mai, as she sort of gave her partner the permission to go, yet not really. Trunks was actually feeling a little guilty about this, but he sort of had to go since Vegeta wasn't really giving him a say in the matter. And he also doubted that Beerus would be all that impressed either, that Trunks was being stubborn again. Because remember, that stubborn act almost got him erased before Kranoa stepped in.
Oh man, where's the Time Patrol when you need them?
The fight with Broly though was a little more even than before, with the third Saiyan on board acting as support for Vegeta. This meant that Broly was being challenged more and more, as well as being less likely to go berserk. That is until Frieza's act of offing Paragus reared its ugly and white purple head, with Broly going ballistic over the accidental death of his father. The 3 Saiyans had to step up even further, and, would you believe, Trunks actually had to help Golden Freeza out, whilst Goku and Vegeta instant transmitted away to regroup and get the fusion angle ready for use and Gogeta stepping in. With Trunks helping Frieza, ironically, Frieza didn't get as badly beaten up as he did in the movie, so unfortunately that little comedic gag was gone. Frieza actually noted the irony from this, but back when they first met. To think how far we've come. Our first interactions involved that sword of yours, but now that sword is aimed at another. Who would have thought that things would have gone this way, eh, Trunks?
Not me, but trust me, if I could go back in time to then, I'd still do the same thing. We're not friends.
Oh, trust me, the feeling's mutual. Your act proved to be for the best. With that moment of reflecting over, the pair were able to, not exactly control Broly, at least give the Super Saiyan Rager the runaround with 2 powers bouncing around at the same time. When Gogeta arrived, Frieza and Trunks fell back and let the fusion do its thing. The tyrant noting the power of Gogeta and internally congratulating himself for the tenacity of Saiyans, him discovering it personally, especially having directly fought one with the aid of a half Saiyan for an hour and a half. That same feeling of intrigue from the movie still residing here. When the fight was done and Broly had been wished away by the likes of Chilai, thus saving his life, Gogeta still let Frieza go, much to the chagrin of Trunks. But when asked later about this, Vegeta pointed out that they had really nothing to worry about regarding the Emperor in the long run.
Don't worry, we're always one step ahead of him. And besides, I think he quite likes having us around. We complete him, so it would be in his best interest not to be rid of us.
Trunks was still very perplexed by this ideology, but, despite possessing Saiyan traits and mannerisms, he still had some human in him. There's still some very deep and puzzling mysteries to be had with this one. Years later, and we approach the end of Z. Pari now is a 4-year-old young boy, and is a very chipper fighter, thanks to the tutelage of his grandfather Vegeta. In that time, Trunks had finally been able to keep his promise to Mai, and had backed off considerably from fighting in the front lines, only offering to help when the need arose and there was a last resort. Like with the situation when the Dragon team as a whole had to fight alongside one another against the galactic prisoners before Moro showed up around about chapter 58 of the manga. He did have to step up then, and Mai did allow that. Aside from that, he, Mai and Pari were happy, keeping a low profile, and that is what they like to keep it as. However, the World Martial Arts Tournament was something to look at as a group bonding exercise, a bit of fun. And after all, Trunks and Mai could really use the money. They really didn't like getting handouts from Bulma and so had requested not too long ago to be cut off. They wanted to make their own way in life and had since moved out in the countryside as well, that being the final handout from Bulma. Pari, though, wanted to fight. He wanted to test his might against not only the likes of the Dragon Team, his friends and mentors, but also against the likes of Pan. He and Pan had become rivals of sorts. Nothing particularly nasty or anything, but since Buller wasn't really all into sparring, the pair had naturally gravitated towards each other as competitive angles. They would get on quite well, and in the tournament, they would meet and do battle, promising to their parents not to destroy the arena because it would look odd for a bunch of 4 and 5-year-olds destroying a whole arena. And since that would probably actually happen later on with Goku and Vegeta anyway, so don't ruin it for them. Who would win against those two? Well, it'd be the likes of Pan still. Why? Well, it's simply down to the fact that Gohan's smarts and skills were just about better than Trunks's, and despite Vegeta's excellent training with Pari, it did get quite stressful for the young lad, and their sessions would be a little bit sporadic, a little bit inconsistent. So the more consistent routine from Pan paid dividends in the end. But Pari still took it well, taking on board his parents' overview on life. Don't get stressed out about such things. It's not worth it. This more laid-back lifestyle was something of which the trio absolutely adored and relished. And in fact, this meant that they actually were having another kid on the way, all to add to their relaxed menagerie. All was looking up for them, and I think they deserve it. A nice balance of Dragon Team life and their own life. And that's where we end things. So what do you folks think? Do you feel that this would be a lovely way to see out Future Trunks and Mai's life settling down like this? Leave a comment below, and let's get this discussion going. And I shall see you in the next video. Catch you later!